But Huda Sha'arari was born into a wealthy Egyptian family in Cairo in 1879. Her father was a notable from Upper Egypt who held a government position. She received an education through tutoring and loved every minute of her studies. By the age of 9, she had memorized the Quran and began to study Arabic. Her rare education experience was one she was grateful for because it was from her education that gave her insight to the many injustices circulating throughout Egypt. From her very early years, she envied the advantages males received over females, including her own brother, Umar. When she questioned the lack of attention she received over her brother, she was answered, "But you are a girl and he is a boy, and you are not the only girl while he is the only boy. One day, the support of the family will fall upon him. When you marry, you will leave the house and honor your husband's name, but he will perpetuate the name of his father and take over his house." Sha'arari was only 5 years old when her father passed away, and although she idolized her father and her brother, she could not let go of her developing feelings of jealousy towards the superior positions men received over women in general. Just as Nassif did, Sha'arari also struggled to overcome these limitations when she encountered a familiar act of suppression, an arranged marriage. At the age of 13, Sha'arari entered a marriage arranged by her family. She was married to her cousin, whom she had always seen as another father or older brother figure, yet still entered the marriage because she could not live with the responsibility of dishonoring her family's name. Because of her strong views on her husband, Sha'arari experienced a deep period of dismay right after her marriage, which lasted for years afterward, including 7 years of separation from her husband. During the separation, she gained new experience which empowered her as a woman and a person overall. She resumed her schooling and took a new liking to music and the languages of French and even more Arabic she began to study. During this time, she grew into a culturally diverse woman who knew what she wanted. She eventually chose to try to reconcile with her husband due to the persistent demands from her family and the pressure of dishonoring her family as well, which constantly tormented her inside. With the personal experience of unfair treatment, continuous limitations, and unrealistic views men had of women, Sha'arari began to strive for change of all women's lives. She intensely focused on improving education opportunities, displaying veiling options, and implementing marriage reforms in Egyptian society. She used her political connections from her husband. He was one of the high organized leaders of the Waft Party, and her hostility towards British colonization to feed her fight. Although she detested British occupation in Egypt, she did adopt Britain's form of westernization to Egypt, which was to provide women of Egypt with an equal chance of political, social, and economic prosperity. Under the Waft rule in Egyptian constitution, men were only allowed to take advantage of voting privileges. Feeling angry and betrayed for supporting a political party that did not support any other woman, including herself, she founded the Egyptian Feminine Union on March 16, 1923. Her overall objective focused on educating women on social, legal, and political rights, but especially women's suffrage. Although women did not obtain the right to vote or the right as a legal citizen during her lifetime, these revelations occurred in 1956. She still worked endlessly till her last days to bring these reformations to Egypt. Her first public display of feminism came in May of 1923. After attending a conference in Rome, she and her great friend and fellow feminist, Saza Nabawari, arrived in Cairo. As both women stepped off a train, each removed their veil from their face as a symbolic gesture towards their emancipation. The bold act represented Sha'arari's attitude towards suppression. Even though she personally did not believe in quickly removing the veil that fast, she believed in more of a gradual removal. The reason she did it was to show that she was bringing modernity to the country of Egypt. Even though she did not take all the head covering off, she just removed the veil from her face. It gave her the identification she needed to associate herself with Western views. It showed her opinion on the backwardness of a nation modernists felt in comparison to the honor and modesty traditionalists felt the veil brought. Many others saw Sha'arari's act as a way for women to take on a Western persona and bring modernity to Egypt, which would ultimately benefit Egypt and its relations with other countries. Much controversy also came from the incident, including the view some men took on unveiling women. As some men saw it, unveiling women meant showing off the sexual qualities women had and carried with them. This would cause future problems for women to bring change into marriage laws because these laws were there to make sure women behaved in an orderly, respectable fashion. Reconstructing marriage laws included many different aspects. Sha'arari and the EFU's central focus points included changing laws on divorce and polygamy and implementing a minimum marriage age. Minor success came from the fight for marriage reformation. Not much of anything came from modifying laws on divorce and polygamy, but success was achieved from the EFU's petition on implementing a minimum marriage age. In 1923, the government passed a law stating minimum marriage age for girls is 16, boys 18. The passing of this law made Shaharari very happy. Her internal struggle with her own marriage always stirred inside her. Knowing girls could not be married off at such a young age gave Shaharari hope for the future women of Egypt. With one goal accomplished, she and the EFU set focus on another, educating women. The only way for all women to understand the rights they had been deprived from was to educate all women in schools. Primary education was declared a priority in 1925 under the Egyptian constitution. Secondary schools gradually opened for women, as well as the first university, Fawd University. The first Egyptian female graduate to graduate from college in Egypt occurred in 1933 from Fawd. With women advancing the educational system, Egypt prepared itself for women to take on these ultimate changes. Both Malik Hifni Nassif and Huda Sha'arari gave great contributions to reforming a corrupt society in Egypt during the early and mid-20th century. Both women raised awareness of the dissatisfaction Egypt gave to its women, and both women laid foundational work for future women to break ground with. Although Nassif chose to exercise her views through Islamic discourse, whereas Sha'arari chose to fight for women's rights through a Western voice, both women impacted society in tremendous ways. But if both women had such a huge impact on women and society in Egypt, then the question remains, why does Nassif's voice tend to always be overlooked and passed away in history? Perhaps it's due because of her persistent choice not to go against her beliefs in Islam and perhaps due to her early death in 1918, which made it harder for her works to be published in the Western world. With both of these factors standing in her way, it is easy for one to see why perhaps Nassif and her works get swept aside. Ironically, Nassif is one legacy in which Sha'arari respects and remembered as she continued her journey to bring drastic reformations of Egypt. During Nassif's lifetime, Britain still had control and power over Egypt. This made her goal of obtaining same equality for men and women even harder to achieve. Her fight for women became secondary to the fight men fought for independence from Britain. Men and women joined the fight for Egyptian independence, and even if that meant the fight for women had to temporarily wait. Nassif did not see any point in waiting for Britain to relinquish control over Egypt before speaking on behalf of women's rights. She fought a struggle within a struggle which proved to be very tough, but not tough enough for her to give up. She worked endlessly every day to bring complete reformation to all Egyptian women's lives until her dying days. Nassif's unexpected death was a severe loss to the fight for Egyptian women's rights and equality, and impacted many people's lives from all over. Her funeral was attended by front-rank feminists, government leaders, including the Minister of Education, and men of the conservative Umala class. Having so many respectable people at a woman's funeral was not the typical norm in 1918. The attendance proves how powerful Nassif and her message was received by a society and continued to influence many for future years of Egypt. For example, in 1924, 7 years after her death, a group of respectable feminists led by Huda Sha'arari held one commemoration for her. As gratifying and remarkable as this is, the commemoration stands as the only memorial held for Nassif. For someone as significant as her, one tribute is not acceptable for a woman who influenced so many others to finish the work she began. 78 years after her death and 71 years after her commemoration, scholars and people from all over the world wanted to find some way to give credit back to Nassif. In 1996, a website entitled The Women in Memory Forum was created to honor pioneer Egyptian women like Nassif and any other woman whose life works were not fully appreciated for. Generating websites like this not only informs people of the common misconceptions, but also brings back some justice to unappreciated women like Nassif, which they rightfully deserve. My argument is not to take away any credit that Huda Sha'arari earned and rightfully deserved. My point is to raise awareness of the injustice society has done to Malik Hifni Nassif. Her legacy has almost been depleted, and her works have gone unnoticed in mainstream Egyptian history for too long. As feminists today work towards properly honoring Nassif, they still must continue to give credit to Sha'arari. Her life work of fighting for Egyptian women her life work for fighting for rights Egyptian women deserved became the sole reason for her fame and respect as leading feminist during women's fights for fundamental changes in Egyptian society. Sha'arari's courage and outstanding leadership helped bring reformation during her and after her lifetime. Her affiliation as a central figure in the 20th century justifies the process of her lifetime goals for all Egyptian women, but a good part of Shahrabari's work is due to the foundations Nassif put in place and the influential qualities she received during her lifetime.